Hey guys, welcome to another painting guide. In today's video I will try to give advice to beginners about what they need or don't need to buy before they start building and painting miniatures. When someone develops an interest in miniatures and they start doing some research, they probably realize quite soonish that the barrier of entry is quite high. This is not exactly an easy hobby to get into, and you need a lot of things even just to get started. And I think it's actually quite easy to bounce off early on because you don't have the necessary tools and equipment to avoid frustrations. And on the flip side, it's also easy to go crazy with the purchases, spending money on stuff that you either don't actually need or things that will overcomplicate your first days and weeks in the hobby. So in this video I will attempt to go through all the things I would and wouldn't buy if I had to start from scratch again. And to keep things organized and easy to follow, I will walk you through the stuff in order when you need it in the process of building and painting the minis. Alright, let's get started by getting the most obvious thing out of the way first. If you want to paint miniatures, you will need to buy some minis. And I won't go into this too much since I assume anyone watching this already has some models in mind and they are probably furiously browsing the online stores trying to figure out where to spend their first hobby dollars. But try not to go crazy with your purchases right in the beginning. As you progress in the hobby, your taste in what you like to build and paint will change. It's easy to buy stuff on a whim only for it to get a dust in the drawer because you found something else that you like more a little bit later. Also, don't buy huge and complicated models if you can avoid it. Believe me, it's better to tackle those later on when you have some experience building and painting under your belt. Okay, let's assume that you ordered a couple of boxes of models and only reasonable amounts, of course. You didn't go all in like some people on Reddit. The first thing you will need is a good desk lamp. Miniatures are probably, not surprisingly, quite small and they have tiny details everywhere, so you will need a good lamp to be able to see everything clearly without ruining your eyes. You can of course use a lamp that you already have, but I would strongly suggest using something that is reasonably bright and ideally with close to daylight color temperature. This is important because if you get something that is much warmer or colder than daylight, the colors you see under your lamp will be different from what you get when you look at the mini in a normal light. And the difference can be quite big and most of the time you will not be happy about it. I tried quite a few different lights initially, but then I have settled on this desk light which has served me for years. This one is branded Neatfi or Neatfi, but I have seen a lot of similar ones under different brand names as well. The next thing you should buy will be something you might think you don't need, especially if you are younger. A set of magnifying glasses. And believe me, they make a huge difference even if you have great vision. Having a nice desk lamp alone will let you see details that would otherwise be obscured by shadows, but if you also add some magnifying glasses on top of that, you will be surprised how much more detail you will be able to make out. And you might think that you see the mini perfectly, but believe me, you don't. And the glasses help immensely, especially when you need to paint tiny details like the eyes of the minis. This is one of those things you will wave a hand at until you have tried them, and after that you can't imagine painting without them. You can get them from Amazon or Temu for quite cheap. I use these ones with exchangeable lenses and they have been working great so far. The next thing I advise to get immediately is a good sized cutting mat. This is to protect your desk from cuts, dripping glue, drilling into it, and of course paint stains. I use a big A2 sized one which covers a good chunk of my desk, but an A3 or A4 sized one will also do a much better job than nothing at all. This is not exactly a super interesting or glamorous purchase, but believe me, it's very useful. Now we have a cutting mat to work on, some good lights to build and paint by, and some magnifying glasses to look properly nerdy. So let's start the building process with some absolutely necessary tools first. Most minis come in pieces either on sprues if they are made of plastic or on gates if they are resin or metal. To clip them off, you will need a good pair of clippers, also known as flush cutters. As with anything hobby related, there are some relatively cheap ones, but also some super expensive ones as well. And I wouldn't go with the cheapest ones if I could avoid it, since usually they are clumsier, less sharp and precise than the quality ones. You can actually damage the models if you use bad quality clippers, so don't try to use the ones you got for free with your 3D printer, for example. But as a beginner, there is no need to buy super expensive ones either. You can do that later when you know you need it. Personally, I have been using these ones from Greenstock World and they are much higher quality than the ones I started out with, but they are very far from the super expensive ones. I never felt the need for better ones, so a beginner should be fine with them as well. Once you cut the pieces off, you will need something to clean some of the knobs and bits of sprue that still remain on them. For this, you will need a hobby knife like these ones. Once again, there are a ton of options out there, including official Games Workshop ones, which are usually the same thing but more expensive. My advice is to go for one that feels better in your hand if you get the chance to try it out. Also, one that you can easily find replacement blades for. There are different sizes of these and you will occasionally have to swap them out, so it's important to be able to find replacements for the one you have. So we clip the pieces of the sprue and clean the knobs with the hobby knife. Next you will need some plastic glue and super glue, and I would buy both just to have them handy. You will most likely use both anyways. But if you bought plastic models, like most of the ones from Games Workshop for example, then you will need plastic glue, also known as plastic cement. This will fuse the pieces together, but it only works on plastic. For anything else, like metal or resin minis, you will need super glue instead. This will work on plastic as well, but plastic glue is much better for that, so you shouldn't be using anything else on plastic minis. There is one more thing I haven't mentioned so far, and that is mold lines. Most minis will have some form of mold lines on them. This is basically excess material that remains on the mini after the manufacturing process. If you don't remove it, it will look quite unseemly on the mini when painted. It's a pain in the butt, but you have to remove them. And some companies are selling dedicated mold line removing tools. Trust me, you don't need those. You can simply use the dull side of the hobby knife to scrape away the mold lines and most other minor imperfections on the mini. I know that some people will passionately disagree with me, but I also don't think that you need any files or sandpaper as a beginner either. Gently scraping the surface smooth with the dull side of the knife is enough in most cases to prepare your mini for painting. Later on, when you want to paint for competitions or something similar, you can spend hours sanding and filing every surface, but as a beginner that is not really necessary. Alright, we went through all the necessary and unnecessary things. Here are a couple of things that are not strictly necessary but are nice to have. Tweezers. As we already established, minis are small and their little parts can be even smaller, so sometimes tweezers can be a lifesaver. You don't need them most of the time, except when you do, and then you will be happy to have them. A hobby drill. I mainly use this to drill the barrels of guns because that is a thing, believe it or not, and people will ostracize you if you don't. And they will be right, barrels need to be drilled to get used to it. They are also quite useful when you want to pin a model onto the base or something similar. I didn't use milliput or green stuff when I started out, and you can actually tell if you take a close look at the models I put together early in my career. These two putties are great for filling gaps on your minis in case some parts don't fit perfectly. Finally, it's nice to have some blue tack or equivalent handy so you can temporarily fix something onto the model or to mount the figure onto the base without gluing it down. Okay, now we have our models built and ready to be painted, so it's time to look at all the stuff you need to do some actual painting. This is where things can get way more complicated and expensive, so let's see what we actually need. And before you start slapping the paint on, you need to get those models primed to make sure the paint will stick to them properly and will stay on as well. The usual solution is to buy some rattle can primers, but alternatively you can also use brush-on primers or an airbrush like I do, but we will talk about airbrushes later. But the simple solution is to go with rattle cans, and I would buy a black one and a much lighter one like a light gray for example. The black one is for when you want to paint with normal acrylic colors, and the lighter one is for working with contrast paints. We will talk about these in a second as well. As a beginner, I would buy from established brands, and honestly I would probably go with Games Workshop ones and try out other cheaper ones later. Speaking of which, another thing I would invest in as a beginner is some guides and tutorials about painting. You can find a lot of stuff on YouTube, but there is a ton more material available on Patreon. For example, you can find a ton of PDF painting guides on my Patreon page and also a lot of time-lapse videos where you can see me painting in real time. Nothing beats actual practice, but these videos can help you avoid most early mistakes and bad habits, plus give you ideas and guidance for the future. By subscribing, you will get access to all of those resources and support the channel so I can keep doing more of these videos. Alright, now your models are primed and you have downloaded the painting guide from Patreon that you want to follow. Time to figure out what other stuff you need. It might not seem like the most important thing, but you will need a mug. You will need this full of water so you can rinse your brushes, which you will do a lot. But you don't need any fancy dedicated thing from Games Workshop, just get a normal mug that you don't mind getting dirty. Now we need something to hold the minis with. Most people, myself included, don't like handling the minis in their hands while painting. You can easily damage the delicate bits or rub off the paint you already applied if you are not careful. To prevent that, you can fix the mini on a painting handle, which makes things much easier and neater. There are a lot of different versions of these, including some DIY ones that you can do, but for me the official Games Workshop ones have always worked the best. Feel free to choose whichever seems to fit you the most, but make sure to have at least one of these around before you start painting. Now we are almost at the interesting stuff, so the paints and the brushes, but before that there is one more essential thing: you will need a wet palette. I know that there are people out there who will tell you that you don't need one, but believe me, they just don't know any better. You will have a much better time from the get-go if you don't frustrate yourself with paint drying on your dry palette. With a wet palette, your results will be better, you will save paint, and you will enjoy painting a lot more. I have a whole video dedicated to this topic where I show you how you can build one and which ones I suggest buying, so check that out. And one final thing that you definitely need is a roll of paper towels. This might seem trivial, but it is just as important as the wet palette itself. Watch my wet palette video to find out why. Alright, let's talk about brushes next. Here you have two choices: synthetic and Kolinsky sable brushes. The synthetic ones don't last long and are not great for detail work, but they are cheap. The natural hair Kolinsky ones are expensive, last a lot longer with proper care, and they are great for painting details. My advice is to get at least 3 high quality sable ones, a size 1, a size 0 and a size 00. You will be using these to paint all the details. And on top of those, I would also get a bunch of cheap synthetic brushes of various sizes. Get a couple of big ones as well, they can come in handy. You can use these to paint stuff on bases, to do base coating on large surfaces, paint metallic paints, basically all the stuff that would ruin your good brushes. For Kolinsky sable brushes, my personal favorites currently are Green Stuff World Gold Series, Abteilung 502 from AK Interactive, and Rosemary & Co. For synthetic ones, the brands don't really matter, but try to get ones that at least maintain a decent point. You might be tempted to skip the high quality brushes in the beginning, but believe me, that is a bad idea. You will only get frustrated trying to be precise with synthetic brushes, fighting against your own tools instead of focusing on getting better. And you will need one more thing for maintaining those brushes, especially the sable ones, some brush soap. No need to buy fancy and expensive branded ones. If you have an art store near you, you can probably get a big chunky one for a couple of bucks and it will last you years. I have been using mine for 5 years and it's still going strong. And now it's time to start talking about acrylic paints, and this is where things can get really expensive and also frustrating, so let me try to make this as simple as possible. When I started the hobby, I immediately bought a huge starter set, thinking that this way I would have the right color no matter what I needed to paint. All those paints are now packed away and I never used them. It was a huge waste of money. There are pretty big differences between the available paint lines in terms of quality, beginner friendliness, and also in what they are good for. And if you get the wrong ones, you might get frustrated really fast by the paint not behaving the way you expect. This topic probably deserves a whole video, and considering that I collected a lot of paints from various ranges over the years, I should probably make one, but the bottom line is the following. Don't buy a whole starter set right at the start, no matter how tempting it might be. Instead, choose a project or two that you want to start painting and buy the paints you need specifically for those. Buy the paints from some of the most established brands. Personally, I would go for AK Interactive, Vallejo, or Citadel. Avoid brands like Scale 75, Chimera, and Green Stuff World in the beginning. They are great products, but not great for beginners. Normally, I would also advise to avoid Army Painter because of my bad experience with their products, but I haven't tried their new line of paints. Supposedly they are good, but I can't vouch for that. If you buy the paint specifically for the projects you are painting, chances are that you will end up with a lot of different normal colors, metallic colors, technical paints, as well as washes, and after a couple of projects you will have enough paints in your repertoire to do almost anything, but without getting a ton of colors you will never use. And if you buy from various brands, you will also figure out which ones you like most. Maybe you like that Citadel paints have all the right colors for your favorite Space Marine legions, but you realize that you simply hate the pots they come in. Or that you love the unique colors of Scale 75 paints, but you hate their consistency and the fact that the paints change color after they dry. And maybe you love the coverage of AK Interactive, but you don't like the matte finish they produce. We haven't talked about contrast paints yet. These are a completely different way to paint your minis, and they have changed the painting experience of a lot of people lately. They are much easier to paint with, but they are quite limited in the quality you can achieve with them compared to normal acrylics if you are using them exclusively. They are a great tool though, especially when you combine them with normal paints. As a beginner, I wouldn't start with them unless you only want to do some quick and dirty army painting and nothing else. They won't teach you the skills that you should start developing right from the start, like proper brush control, edge highlighting, layering, and so forth. That being said, relatively early on I would choose a project to paint exclusively with contrast paints and buy those paints specifically to see how I like it, get used to the application, and to build up a small collection of paints. You might not want to paint with contrast only, but they are a fantastic tool to have around to complement your normal acrylic projects. Okay, now here are a couple of things I wouldn't buy as a beginner when it comes to the painting part of the hobby. I wouldn't bother with inks, enamel washes, or oil paints. These things are very cool and you can do interesting techniques and effects with them, but you should experiment with them a little later when you already know the basics. I would also avoid all the various products companies want to sell you to thin your paints. They can be used for some specific tasks, but in 99% of the cases you are better off using simply water to thin your paints, so especially early on they are a waste of money. Finally, and this will sound weird coming from someone who loves using an airbrush, but as a beginner I wouldn't buy one because even a cheaper one is a relatively large investment, especially if you consider all the stuff that you need to operate it properly. But also because it's a whole different set of skills you need to learn and practice when you should be acquiring the basics of brush control and paint control. So I wouldn't get an airbrush immediately, but once you are fairly certain that you want to stick with painting as a hobby and you already have some experience under your belt with the brush, you should definitely consider getting one. For anyone painting minis even half seriously, the airbrush is one of the best and most fun tools to learn. I have a whole video dedicated to this topic as well, so give that a watch if you are interested. Now we have our minis painted, we still need to make some cool looking bases too, and for these we need some basic basing materials. I would once again only buy this stuff specifically for the project you are painting to slowly build up your supplies instead of buying a lot of stuff that you don't need. But if you can just visit a gaming store whenever you want to pick these up, I would start with 1-2 terrain pastes, preferably 2 different finishes, and 2 types of tufts, ideally a green one and some yellow dried looking ones. With the combination of these, you should be able to do a simple base for any miniature, and later on you can add more stuff as needed, like for example some basing pigments. Finally, you will need some varnishes to protect your minis when you finish painting them, especially if you want to play with them and touch them all the time. Initially, you probably won't know if you want a matte, a glossy or a satin finish on your minis, and you might change your preferences later on. So you can either take a guess or buy a matte and a gloss varnish and mix them together when needed for a satin finish. This way you will have all the options available to you. And that's it, that's all the things you need if you want to paint your minis and you want to start fully prepared. It's quite a long list and not an insignificant amount of money, but believe me, it's easy to spend a lot more on useless things that you don't need and still not having the right tools when you actually need them. If I left something important out or if you have any questions, please share them in the comment section. I'm happy to answer. I hope this video will help some beginners navigate their entry into painting minis a little better. This is a fantastic hobby and I hope many of you will stick with it and find it as much fun as I do. If you do, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more painting content and check out my Patreon for even more in-depth guides. But before I sign off, I wanted to thank my Patreon members for their continued support. They are the ones that make this channel possible. Without them, I wouldn't be able to dedicate the time necessary to keep the channel going. And that is especially true for the ones in the captain level. Thank you guys, see you in the next one.